Their songbook.
I got it. Everybody got something.
You guys got a songbook?
Yeah.
All right.
This is upside down.
Oh, my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like melody flow. Oh, my soul, I worship Your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing Your song again. Whatever the past and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, I worship Your holy name. You're rich in blood and You're slow to anger. Your name is great and Your heart is kind. For Your goodness I will keep on singing. 10,000 reasons for my heart to find. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, oh worship Your holy name. And on that day when my strength is failing, and Your fear and my time may come, still my soul will lift and live. 10,000 years and forevermore. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, I worship Your holy name. I worship Your holy name.
Number 4. 4. Right up Neil. Oh man, I get it. It's difficult to.
Now is the time to worship God. Now is the time to give Your heart. Come, just be Lord in worship. Come, just be Lord before Your throne. One day every trouble will turn to a God. One day everything will come. So the very where I serve You now. Come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give Your heart. Come, now is the Lord to worship. Come, just be Lord before Your God. Come, one day every trouble will turn You a God. One day everything will bow. Till the very time the Lord will glory to You now. That was it.
That was it. He doesn't have the last on that one.
Oh,
Okay, number 14.
Majesty.
We can do the next one, 15.
You want to do that?
Yeah,
one?
sure.
Okay.
Let's do that.
Okay.
We're getting warmed up now.
Well,
I know.
You got on a run
Well, at
there.
Christmas time, we'll sing a lot. You know?
Start the bus.
Oh, one thing here. When everybody's done, I do have the new address and phone numbers and everything.
Oh, good.
Janet typed it and gave it to me, or she sent it to me, and then I made copies. Good. So, yeah, so when everybody wants one.
Good. All right. Who's ready for questions? Except me.
Mike and I could not get through this week. We both were crazy busy.
Okay.
Well, Mike answered most of them last week, so I guess he can get a break.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Dan. Pretty nice of me. I have to drink, you know.
All right. Let's go back to Joshua 5 and review a little bit. Okay. There were only 4 questions.
Yeah, but they were big.
They were big. They were. Yes. It took me a week to prepare. So, by God's miraculous intervention, some 2 million people crossed the Jordan River. People of Canaan are frightened and their hearts melted. So, from every human point of view, it was the best time for Israelites to strike immediately. However, from God's point of view, Israel was not yet ready to fight. There was some unfinished spiritual business to do. Name 3 spiritual things they had to do first. Mikey?
Well, they had to be circumcised.
Good. The second? Second?
They had to prepare their minds and soul for the upcoming. They had, what do they call that?
Consecrate.
Pardon?
Consecrate.
Yeah, consecrated. Yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
Passover.
Passover.
Yes. and Passover.
Okay.
Yes.
And the third one was after they did the Passover,
They ate off the land.
they ate off the lamb. Very good. Okay, what do we know about circumcision? Except, like Gary said last time, it's ouch. So, okay, give the definition of the word circumcision based on Genesis 17 through 13. Yeah?
Yeah, I wasn't sure exactly what you wanted by definition, but it was the sign of the covenant, and kind of symbolized that he was to be their God, and part of the covenant was possessing the land of Canaan, and that covenant had been promised to all their descendants, and it was an ongoing covenant.
Right.
It was given to Abraham first, but it was for all.
Right. So circumcision was the sign for everlasting covenant between God and Abraham.
Yep.
It was a physical sign they had to have on their body. Okay. According to Exodus 12:48, what was the law regarding the circumcision and the Passover? So now,
No uncircumcised person male could be part of the Passover. That included aliens living with the Jews.
that's right.
You had a big surprise to your house guest.
Yeah.
Right.
Guess what?
By the way,
While you're here,
this generation was not circumcised during 40 years in the wilderness. They did not do that. So why it was so important to perform it before conquering Canaan?
I thought this was interesting.
You mean to do circumcision was interesting? No, they go to
The explanation was interesting.
Okay.
To remove the reproach of Egypt from them.
Okay. Let me see what I have here.
But there was even a bigger reproach.
So, if you let me, I can tell you what I thought it was.
What do you have?
Okay. Since circumcision was the part of the covenant between God and Abraham, involving the promise of the land. So it was critical to perform the renewal of circumcision before starting the conquest of the land. Thus, in Gilgal, God said, in effect, before I fight your battles in Canaan, is that not pronounced? Canaan, I'm sorry. You must have this mark of the covenant in your flesh. Agree?
Yes.
All right. How circumcision was fulfilled in the New Testament? That's it. There is a Jack?
I had the circumcision of the heart was in the New Testament be following Christ with all your heart, your mind, and soul to put off the sinful nature of man.
Right.
Okay.
So Christ
In the New Testament.
Christ fulfilled that for us. We don't have to do it if we don't want to anymore, but our flesh was circumcised by what Christ did for us.
Heart, physical.
Okay. So it says, and in him you were also circumcised with a circumcision made without hands in the removal of the body of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ. What does it mean? So circumcise your heart and stiffen your neck no longer.
It's the spiritual side of that. So even at that point in time, although physically there was circumcision, I'm sure God wanted them to turn toward Him and be reminded again that He was their God and that they should be obedient to Him.
Very good. Yes. It's all about spiritual side of it.
Can I add one more thing about circumcision? Am I allowed to
She's
speak?
thinking way over from this.
I'm not supposed to talk during this.
Please.
You can be a participant.
One important element also is that it's a promise, but it's also a prophecy. Remember what God said to Abraham. You're going to sojourn, you're going to end up being in Egypt,
430 years.
at the end of 430 years, then you will come into the land. So that's the event that we're talking about. The 430 years is up.
Okay, so it involves prophecy. Okay. All right. New name. Name a few facts about manna. There is a whole chapter about manna. Exodus 16. It gives you all the information. Mike, what do you know about manna?
You're right. There's a whole lot of.
What do you know?
Well,
You were there, right?
yeah. Thank you very much. The very first thing is it came every day, and it's a good thing because you couldn't keep it. So once you went out and gathered manna in the morning, and you got rid of what manna you had from yesterday, and let's see, I knew a couple other things.
So it was a daily miracle from God.
Yes.
Except it was for 6 days. On the 6th day, they were to collect for 2 days.
Right.
They weren't to collect any on the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
The double portion.
The double portion.
And they were to take an omer per person that lived in the tent.
Mm-hmm.
It was
What did you say?
an omer.
It's
O-M.
a measure.
A
of
measure, yes.
yeah.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
okay.
And if they kept it, there was a faith part of this too, because they had to believe that it was going to be there. If they kept any over, it got maggots.
Last time I was saying that it's kind of difficult to keep faith during 40 years, every day, day by day. At the same time, you know that, like, next day, God is going to give it to you. You know, when I was thinking about this, it came to my mind that, so it was a daily miracle from God, okay? And remember what Jesus said in Matthew 6 about don't worry about tomorrow. I saw a very, very clear parallel to that. Okay, what else do we know about manna?
It stopped once they began eating out of the land of Canaan.
Yes.
Okay.
It was white like colander seeds and
Coriander.
and tasted like wafers made with honey.
Okay. Okay. So where did they store it? Where did they store it?
I don't know. They could cook it, they could boil it, they could bake it.
I mean, I'm sorry, where,
Oh,
I'm talking about the ark.
oh yeah, they put it in, they were to put some in a jar
And keep
in
it?
the Ark of the Covenant
Yes. So, for what purpose?
for future generations to know how God provided.
Right, it was everlasting reminding for future generations about God's provision. Jack.
Question then, was that then the fourth element that was put into the ark?
Well, it
The
was,
three were original.
there were what? There were tablets
Aaron's rod.
Uh-huh.
And the manna.
Manna.
and a manna.
And then later,
Mhm.
by the end of Deuteronomy, then the Torah was put in.
Okay.
Also, when we read carefully about manna in Exodus 16, God says, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you." So God names it bread from heaven. And Jesus also talks about himself as a bread of life.
Right.
All right.
That's considered a staple.
Okay. Why did you, the last one, and it was kind of difficult for me. Why the general of Lord's angelic army showed up at that critical moment, and why was it so important for the future of Israel? Why at that moment? Well, we know who he was.
I wasn't sure either, but was it have something to do with he didn't really know what the plan was yet, right?
Well,
I mean, he's probably staring at the wall saying, okay, God.
okay. Yeah, well, the part of it, I think the next chapter says, was it God saying to Joshua, or this guy? Or the
That's
same
what
guy?
I questioned
Or
too.
the same
Was
guy?
it still the same guy?
Theophany. It's the better put general, supreme commander of the angelic forces, angelic army. It's the Saba army of the Lord. So it is.
Then is
The
it
Lord.
him still talking in the 6th chapter?
Okay. So why at that moment?
Well, I think he showed up to assure Joshua that he had said, I will be with you, but here he's saying, here I am with you, I will be with you through this whole ordeal. Joshua knew it was the Lord and worshipped him. The land was where God would place his name.
I think he knew.
Yeah.
I also have that I thought I think the first major battle that the Jews would face, it was important that they won this battle so that the people would not become discouraged and refuse to enter the promised land.
Yes. Okay. I honestly cheated on this one and asked them to help me because, so here we came up together too. God is taking his property back. Remember?
Yeah.
The land he promised to Abraham 430 years ago. Now he takes it back. So he sends the general of his angelic army to meet with Joshua, to reassure Joshua, and to give him the battle plan. Okay? So it was important for Joshua to understand that this battle, as well as all future battles, it is actually God's
Fought by
war.
God.
It is God's war, and God therefore will lead them in that war. Okay.
Except one.
Yeah, AI.
In Deuteronomy, there's a reference to a book that obviously existed. We don't have it today. Love to read it. It's called The Book of the Wars of the Lord. It's referred to in Deuteronomy.
Oh.
Wow.
We don't have a copy of it. But
Really?
obviously they did.
Okay, sweetheart, you want to do the song?
Yes. Yes. All right.
She
Now.
has the song.
Solo?
No solo.
Okay.
Okay. You need to move your cursor there.
Okay. Before I do this, well, let me go ahead and do it. Okay. Since we're talking about the Battle of Jericho.
Honey, put the cursor in the beginning of the song, or you'll have
Oh.
just the end.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, put it there and hit the button. There we go.
Here we go.
I never heard it before.
Oh, yeah. Remember I said,
Yes. Are they students?
Yes.
Beautiful voice.
All right. Oh, isn't that great? Yeah.
You know, when I was under Randy at Grace Brothers, we sang a very similar version to that. Very similar.
Yeah. It's a great, quote, Negro spiritual. Okay? The interesting thing about it is, the greatest song as it is, it's completely wrong. Because Joshua didn't fight the battle of Jericho.
No,
He didn't go with spear in hand, and in that sense. It's true the walls came tumbling down. Now, all right, so we're going to read, and we're going to go through, and hopefully we will get through, I think we will, 8 verses of Joshua 6. I'm slowing down. I think you'll I think you'll understand why I'm only doing 8 verses. Okay? I will tell you, starting out tonight and teaching this, that this is probably, of all the outlines of the last several years, this probably took me the longest. It was difficult. And I want you to really try to concentrate on this tonight because it's very complex. The thing that's interesting about this section is that if you just read it superficially, you get a basic story, right? Mm-hmm. They march around, the valiant men, the military men are with them, the ark's in front, there's 7 priests, they have 7 trumpets. Okay. Now, they do it once a day, 6 days. All right. You get that story. Except when you start to look at some of the language elements in this story, you realize it's telling you a whole lot more things. There's embedded information inside the language here, and I'm going to try to pull the language elements out and show you what the embedded information is. So let's read the 8 verses first. Now Jericho was tightly shut up because of the sons of Israel. No one went out, no one came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have given Jericho into your hand with its king and the valiant warriors. And you shall march around the city, all the men of war circling the city once. You shall do it for 6 days. Also, 7 priests shall carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. Then, on the 7th day, you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And it shall be that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people will go up, every man straight ahead." There's the battle plan. God gives it to Joshua. Verse 6, "So Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. Then he said to the people, Go forward and march around the city, and let the armed man go on before the ark of the Lord." And towards the end, we're going to try to tear this next verse apart. It's very complex. "And it was so that when Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord went forward and blew the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant, quote, of the Lord, followed them." And I'll show you why I think it's a very interesting verse that is, in the grammar, very complex. And what it teaches us, I think, is very interesting. Now, first, as we said, the strategy is told to Joshua, and it's now revealed, of course, Joshua reveals it to the people. Jericho, its king, all the valiant men, undoubtedly were ready for a siege. They were ready for the ropes, the ladders, the battering rams, the arrows, the slings, the spears, which of course didn't occur.
People of Jericho.
The people of Jericho. Okay, they were people that were, we know from archaeological and historical data, that they were very skilled people. That's why they're called the valiant men of Jericho. They were military. They had been in many battles. We have histories of the battles of the Amorites against other groups. They knew how to do war. Now, also we find some interesting things archaeologically about Jericho. First of all, it sits on top of a deep spring. Therefore, you cannot keep them from getting water. It bubbles up inside the area, inside the walls. Now, archaeologically, there have been many different digs of Jericho. It's one of the oldest known walled cities, and it may date back to 5,000 to 6,000 BC. All right? It is a relatively small area. The excavations are only about 8 to 10 acres in size. Okay, so it's not that big.
That's very small.
It is. It's only 8 to 10 times the size of this property that we're on. We're on 1 acre. It's only 8 to 10 times bigger than this whole property. But interestingly enough, and I want you to get a picture as we go on, there's probably, from the book of Numbers, if we add it all up, approximately 600,000 warriors that Israel has. Now think about it. 600,000 warriors are going to be encircling an area that's 8 to 10 acres in size. That would be a pretty compelling view, I think, if you were in Jericho. It would be an absolute sea of Jews out there, okay, obviously in battle array. Now we know that it had a double-walled system. We believe, from what we've seen, is it was about 20 to 30 feet wide, and the walls were approximately 30 feet tall. Now, we can't know a lot more specifics about Jericho, and the reason why is that there are at least 34 different destruction layers in Jericho. So it's very difficult archaeologically to establish a lot of things because so much has been destroyed and rebuilt. And so it becomes difficult to know with precision what was there before it was destroyed since so much has been rebuilt on top of it. The one thing we do know, though, it's interesting, is that there is a 1 meter deep destruction layer that is dated approximately 1400 BC, which is absolutely exactly when we believe this occurred. And this destruction layer is ash, and it's 3 feet deep. Therefore, there was one big fire. And of course, that's what the text tells us, that after the walls come down, they go in and they burn the city. So we do have that archaeological element that we can see. Now, it was the capital city of the Amorites. And if you will, can you put the map up there? Okay. It also was important because it was very strategic. You see down here in the lower right corner, you see Shittim, okay? You see that that's where they first gathered on the east side. Remember, we went through that. They then go through the miracle of the crossing of the Jordan. You see the Jordan River there. And then they camp at Gilgal, which is no more than 2 miles and probably closer to 1 mile from Jericho. So by the time they camp on the other side, there's 2 million of them within 2 miles or a mile and a half of Jericho. Okay? They can be seen at this point. Absolutely by the people in Jericho.
Is that how many were circumcised?
Well, we know, but just based on the book of Numbers, that of the approximate numbers, obviously, but you would think it would have been about 600,000 because none of those guys were circumcised, we're told.
In the wilderness.
In the wilderness, okay? So yeah, it's a lot of people being circumcised. And I'll give you last week's notes because I think you'll find that.
I think I have.
Okay, good. Okay. Now, what is really strategic, if you notice, is once you get to Jericho, it's at the edge of the mountain range. Do you see it there? Mm-hmm. There's the plain, and right at the edge of it is Jericho.
Oh, that's it. I did that. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
There.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
It is important because if you're going to conquer this area, you've got to get and control the mountains. All right? So you've got to get through Jericho, and you've got to go west and go uphill further, and your next spot is going to be the fortress of Ai. And once you get on top there, once you conquer Ai, you're almost on top of the mountain range. And then, of course, you can move north and south.
They were going to split it.
Correct. So, and then, of course, they end up going eventually to Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim up there further north. But that's why it's a strategic place, the topography there. All right. Now, notice also, as I said about the Amorite warriors, that they were experienced, they had known many battles. They also apparently, from archaeological digs, possessed laminated bows. Now, what's the significance? The significance is that a laminated bow is when you cut small portions of a wood bow in length and you glue them together, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 different portions, and you fashion the bow this way. It probably is at least 5 to 10 times more powerful than if you just cut it out of a single piece of wood. So it was a big technological advantage for the Amorites. So they had these weapons of warfare that were very modern at that time in nature. So like I said, they were experienced warriors. Now, in verse 2, there's a very interesting statement that's easy to look over. It is the little phrase, I have given. I have given it into your hands, he says. It is a very interesting tense in the Hebrew. It is called the prophetic perfect tense. And it means that a future thing will transpire which has already been accomplished. I'll say it again. It means a future thing will transpire that has already been accomplished. Therefore, it can only be made by a statement of someone who existed outside of time. Because they have to see the beginning from the end. Right?
Can it be only God?
I don't know who else. Well, I guess it couldn't be only God. I guess the angels could have that view also, to some extent.
How about prophets?
Well, they were given temporarily views. Yeah, temporarily they were given views. That's true. That's true. That's a good point. Now, let's go down and start our discussion here in verse 4. It says, also 7 priests shall carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. And then he goes on and says that on the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, etc., etc. Okay? Now, the word here in Hebrew is not the typical word for a trumpet or a ram's horn, which is the word shofar. It's a different word. It's actually a double word. It is the word shofar yabel. Okay? Now, shofar yabel, I believe, tells us or gives us embedded information in the text that I think is rather interesting and I think tells us something more about the plan and mind of God. The first time we really hear about a shofar is actually in Exodus 19, verse 17. I don't know if you want to look at it. You can go back there and look. Of course, in English, it's kind of boring because it just says, trumpet. Okay? It's very non-specific. You can't really pick up the significance of these things.
Wait a minute. It's where? Leviticus, what did you say?
Exodus 19:17.
Okay.
Exodus 19:7. This is the first time we see it used here. Hopefully I wrote it down correctly. No, I'm sorry, it's 13. It's 13. I'm sorry, I wrote it down incorrectly.
Oh, 13.
No hand shall touch, they're talking about the mountain of God, Horeb, okay? 10 commandments are given. No hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through. Whether beast or man, he shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain. So here's the first reference, and it's interesting. Here, it's the Hebrew is Yobel, Yobel. Okay?
So, okay.
Now I'm going
Not shofar, Yobel.
No, it's Yobel, Yobel. Now, if you study...
So you say the first mention of the trumpet, like in general?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
The law first mentioned would be Exodus 19:17.
Okay.
Okay? 13, I'm sorry. Gosh darn, I wrote it down wrong there. Sorry. All right, now, as I was looking at this issue of trumpets, I realized that it's very complex because there are several different types of trumpets, and each different type of trumpet can be used in a different way, and it can make a different sound. In other words, it can be used to make a different purposeful sound. Short blast, long blast, etc., etc. So you have, and it would be an interesting study to do. It would take forever, but you have, for instance, several different ones that we've named. There's also one called the Bukina, and it is a trumpet which has a spiral-like metal horn. There's another one called a Kotz. See if I can read my own writing. Kotz Oscar Ah. Okay, I can show you and spell it for you. And it's a trumpet which makes what's called a quivering note. So what you find is there is a ram's horn, which is a real ram's horn that's hollowed out. But there's other kinds, and some of them are metal. Now, in this verse, we have the shofar Yabel. It is also called the silver trumpet. And it appears, from what we can tell in its description, it was a long silver tube with flared end. Turn, if you would, to Numbers 10. And I will try to show you some elements of this type of trumpet. Here is where the first ones are made, in Numbers 10. Starting verse 2. Make yourself 2 trumpets of silver, of hammered work. You shall make them, and you shall use them, and notice the things you use them for summoning the congregation, and for having the camp set out. And when both are blown, so there's at least 2 that were originally made, all the congregation shall gather themselves to you at the doorway of the tent of meeting. So if you use 2 of them and you blow them in a particular way, that signals one thing. Okay? Different things are being signaled by different trumpets blown in different ways. I guess that's not unusual. Back when the cavalry in the American West, they would use a trumpet and they would blow it different ways, wake you up, put you to sleep, charge, same kind of thing here. Now verse 4 here, it says, Yet if only one trumpet is blown, then the leaders, the heads of the divisions of Israel shall assemble before you. But when you blow an alarm, the camps that are pitched on the east side shall set out. And when you blow an alarm the second time, the camps which are pitched on the south side shall be set out. An alarm is to be blown for them to be set out. In other words, to ready the camp to move. Okay? When convening the assembly, however, you shall blow without sounding an alarm. So there's a way to blow it to notify, but not as an alarm. You see, a little complicated here. And that's just this particular type of trumpet system, okay? Now, verse 8, the priestly sons of Aaron, moreover, shall blow the trumpets. Now, notice further what they also indicate. When the priests blow them, what happens? Shall blow the trumpets, and this shall be for you a perpetual statute throughout your generations. And when you go to war in your land against the adversary who attacks you, then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpets. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that makes sense to you, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Because what are we reading here in Joshua 6? It's a battle. Okay? So they're sounding these particular trumpets. Then you shall sound the alarm with the trumpets, that you may be remembered before the Lord your God and be saved from your enemies. Verse 10. A further piece of information about the trumpets. And in the day of your gladness and in your appointed feasts, that's the word moed, and it refers to all 7 of the feasts that God set up, 3, 1, and 3. Okay? And your appointed feasts, and on the first days of your months, okay? So each month is indicated by also the signal of these trumpets. You shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offering and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, and they shall be as a reminder of you before your God. I am the Lord your God. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to show you one other thing, though, about these trumpets. And I want you to turn to Leviticus chapter 25. There's another important use that God gave of these silver trumpets. Okay? Leviticus 25, and we'll start in verse 8. He says, you are also to count off 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, so that you have the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years, namely 49 years. Remember, every 7th year was called the Shemitah year. But then there were 7 Shemitahs in a row. Therefore, 7 times 7, 49 years. And the next year, after the end of that last Shemitah year, was called the Jubilee year. Now here's the elements of the Jubilee year. Okay? It says, you'll start in verse 10. You shall thus consecrate the 50th year and proclaim a release through the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his own property, and each of you shall return to his own family. You shall have the 50th year as a jubilee. You shall not sow, nor reap from its aftergrowth, nor gather in from its untrimmed vines. For it's a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You shall eat its crops out of the field. On the year of the Jubilee, each of you shall return to his own property. If you make a sale, moreover, to your friend, or buy from your friend's hand, you shall not wrong one another. Corresponding to the number of years after the Jubilee, you shall buy from your friend. He is to sell to you according to the number of years of crops. And what is being talked about here is if you got in trouble financially in the land you owned, you could, quote, sell the land. But really, in reality, what this is saying is it's never a permanent sale. The longest you could ever lose your property is 49 years. Because on the 50th year, it came back to you. You could never permanently lose it. Now, why? Number one, because God makes a statement in the Abrahamic promise that this is his land. And he reiterates it all through. Secondly, he takes the 12 or 13, depending on your counting them, tribes and gives them an allotment. And they're supposed to stay there. And he gives family groups an allotment. He gives the Levites an allotment. He gives all these different elements allotments. And that's what they're permanently to have. So you can temporarily get in trouble financially and lose control of it, almost like a lease, an indebtment lease. But on the Jubilee year, you get it back.
So therefore, each member of the congregation would, well, each family would keep their property forever.
Yes, ultimately they do. They could lose it temporarily, but they'll get it back by the Jubilee year.
Is this where the Jehovah's Witnesses get the idea that in their will they say this land comes back to me when I come back?
I don't know, maybe. I'm not that familiar with what they teach.
Yeah.
Could be.
They teach that, and they put that in their will.
That's interesting.
Because they believe in reincarnation.
Yeah, that's true. And notice a few more things here. Verse 18. You shall thus observe my statutes and keep my judgments as to carry them out, and you may live securely in the land. Then the land will yield its produce so that you can eat your fill and live securely. So part of knowing that you're going to have enough is following the Shemitahs and following the Jubilee. In other words, don't break it if you want to be fruitful. He says, then I will so order my blessing for you in the 6th year that you will bring forth a crop for 3 years. And then he goes on about how you'll sow. In verse 28, the land moreover, 23, the land moreover shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. For you are but aliens and sojourners with me. Then he goes on and says every piece is of you have property and there's a redemption price for it. That is, if you get in trouble. And it talks about the nearest kinsman redeemer, which we see in the book of Ruth. Also, I'm not going to go on further, but there's one other element also in here too, and that is the Jubilee year was if you sold yourself as a slave to someone because of debts, on the Jubilee year you were released. You're no longer a slave, gone. Okay, annulment of that contract. So we see the following things about this. It's called the Jubilee year is also called the restoration of all things. It's where debts are forgiven, slave tenure is ended,
The land goes back.
and the land goes back and is restored. Now, I think this is rather typological. What did Christ accomplish for us? Were our debts forgiven?
Mm-hmm.
Was our enslavement to sin ended?
Mm-hmm.
And did we get a new land for ourselves
Mm-hmm.
called the kingdom of heaven or kingdom of God? And even an authority on this earth. Matthew 16, Jesus says, I give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Okay? What you bind will be bind. What is released will be released. So, we see here it's a typology also. It's a literal thing that they did, but it's also a typology of Christ's work on the cross. Now, it's also interesting to note that the Jewish New Year begins in the month called Tishri 1, and that starts this celebration called the Feast of Trumpets. That's these trumpets. They announce it. Okay? Okay? So, the use of this trumpet at this time indicates that this
event is the Lord's restoration. He's taking back the land from its not rightful owner called Satan. Okay? It's coming back to its rightful owner, himself. Now, I want to show you something about this. Turn to Acts chapter 3. Go to practically the other end of the Bible. Remember, the idiom that the Jews used of the Jubilee was, it was the restoration of all things. Okay, so go to Acts chapter 3, and we're going to look at verses 20-21 here. Now, this is the second speech of Peter after Pentecost. And here's what he says. He says, I'll start in 19. He says, repent therefore and return, that your sins may be wiped away, just like the debts are wiped away, in order that times of refreshment may come from the presence of the Lord. Remember, the Jubilee year is unique because you don't work, and yet all the fruit of the land shows up. It's given to you in grace that year. He says, verse 20, and that he may send Jesus, the Christ, appointed for you. Okay? What are the festivals called? They're called the appointed times, the Moads. And it says, verse 21, whom heaven must receive until the period of restoration of all things, about which God spoke by the mouth of his holy prophets from ancient time. So Jesus is the restoration of all things. He is the typological ultimate fulfillment of the Jubilee year. He restores us in these ways. Plus, there's two restorations he brings. The first restoration is for sins, and the second restoration is to take back the whole planet when he returns in Revelation 19, right? To the earth to take it over and to win a war that is enacted against him. So, I think there are some very interesting parallels between the Jubilee year, and I think if we didn't realize that these two silver trumpets were the trumpets used, we wouldn't understand all the information about the Jubilee year. This is God's Jubilee as he begins it in taking over Jericho, the beginning of the taking over the conquest of the land.
So you're saying here that during this battle, they were using the trumpets, those specific kind of trumpets.
The silver trumpets. There were 7 of them.
Which were to use on Jubilee year.
Correct.
And they are Shofar Yobel.
Shofar Yobel. The silver trumpets. Isn't it interesting? If you just read it in English, you'd never learn this.
Well, in Russian, it actually, I told you.
Yeah, you told me it's more specific.
It is called Юбилейный трубы, which is Jubilee.
Yep. That's much more specific, but in English it's not. English it just says trumpets, and there's a lot of different kinds, so, it doesn't help us so much in English. We have to dig into it. Now, talking about this interesting battle, okay, remember what the battle is. They take the military men, they take the Ark of the Covenant, they take the 7 priests with the 7 silver trumpets, they march around the outside of Jericho once each day, times 6 days. After each time they march around, they go back and they go back to their camp. And they come out the next morning and do the same thing, okay? And I think probably by day 4 or 5 or whatever, the people in Jericho are going to be saying some probably unkind and unhelpful things to them, shouting down from the walls. We'll talk about that next week. But now, the thing that's interesting to me about this battle, because it is rather bizarre, okay? It is not humanly planned, obviously. It's a unique concept. The other thing is it has a lot of interesting problems for it, or in it. Now let me show you what they are. Okay, in Joshua, go back to Joshua.
I'm very sorry. Did you say something about E, number 7? E.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I skipped over it. Yes.
I thought I meant.
I'm sorry. I skipped over it. Let me repeat. Under number 7E, you have, notice here, you have in verse 4, just in this one verse, you have 7 priests, 7 trumpets, 7 days, and 7 circles made.
Yes,
All being the number of completion. Now, remember when we studied the book of Revelation, we said the unique thing about it was its heptadic structure. 7, 7, 7, 7, 7 built into it, right? In the same way, 7s are built into this battle. 7, 7, 7, 7.
Okay, I don't understand. So the explain.
God used
7 is the number of completion.
Correct.
We see a lot of number 7 in Revelation. We
Right.
see 4 of them in this verse.
right.
Bottom line.
So it's telling you that number 1, there's something spiritual, some kind of spiritual completion that's going to occur because of this battle. It's God designed. Number 2, I'm going to suggest to you, and I'll show you in a minute, that I think it has a very definite relationship to the book of Revelation, and I'll show you why in a minute. Remember, all this stuff is typological. It starts in one place, but then you see it weaves in time through other places and ends up oftentimes showing up in the end of the age. Think about trumpets this way. Okay? What is it that was going to be heard right before the rapture occurs? And a trumpet and a shout will occur. What happens here? 7 trumpets over 7 days, and then what are they told? Be quiet for 6, and then on the 7th one, you're supposed to shout. Okay? You think that's coincidental? I don't think so. Go ahead.
Does that have any coincidental connection with the Gideon when they broke the lamps and they shouted?
Maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah. Because I think it's interesting to think, and we'll get into this maybe next week more. I think we need to ask the question also, who really shouts? Keep it in mind. I think it's
not people or angels.
We'll get into it. I don't want to go there right now, okay? But there's maybe multiple levels of shouting that goes on here.
Question. Were just the fighting men, the 6,000 fighting men, the only ones that were circling, or was the whole Israeli?
I believe it was only the 600,000 fighting men that were going around. They were the men of battle. Okay, that were identified, numbered in Numbers chapter 1.
That's what I thought it said in verse 2 or 3.
Right.
2 or 3.
Correct. Now, in Joshua 6:4, we see, again, the priests carrying the ark and the 7 priests blowing the trumpets. That is, they're all Levites. And we have a problem with this. Turn to Numbers chapter 2. Numbers chapter 2. And I want you to look at verse 33. The Levites, however, were not numbered among the sons of Israel, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. This chapter is about numbering the military. That's what the chapter is about. It's numbering the men of war. The Levites were not there. Why? Because Levites were prohibited from going to war.
They were priests.
They were priests. So where are the Levites in this battle? They're right in the middle of it. Right in the middle of the military men in the procession. That seems to be kind of a contradiction, doesn't it? Okay, secondly, in Joshua 6:7, turn back to Joshua now, we see another interesting statement. Let's read it. He says, "Then he said to the people, go forward and march around the city, and let the armed men go on before the ark of the Lord." Now, I think that's interesting because in many places, but specifically recently in Joshua 3:4, we see the people are never supposed to be in close proximity to the ark. Now they're all crowded around the ark. I mean, can you imagine trying to circle 600,000 people and how wide it would be? I mean, there ain't going to be 3,000 feet between any person and the ark. Guarantee you. That's a violation also, isn't it? Okay? Thirdly, back to Joshua 6:4, we see another fairly obvious violation, I think. It says, "You shall march around the city 7 times on the 7th day and blow the trumpets." What are you supposed to do on the 7th day? Shabbat. You're not supposed to do any work whatsoever. As a matter of fact, turn to particularly Exodus 31. I want to show you how severe and insistent God was about this.
Exodus 31.
Yeah, go to Exodus 31. Let me start reading to verse 14 through 17 here. Nope, I just went to. "Therefore you are to observe the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death." Man, that doesn't sound good for those guys marching around on the Sabbath, does it? Okay? "For whoever does any work on it, that person shall be cut off from among the people." I think if you march around it 7 times on the Sabbath, you would consider that work, don't you? Okay? Verse 15, "For 6 days work may be done, but on the Sabbath day there's a Sabbath of complete rest." I don't think they're being very restful at this point. Okay? "Holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath shall be surely be put to death."
More dramatic.
Okay? Thank you. "So the sons of Israel shall observe the Sabbath to celebrate the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant," which means you ain't supposed to break it. "It is a sign between me and the sons of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, but on the 7th day he ceased from his labor and was refreshed." Seems to be another major problem here with what they're doing. Don't you think?
God told them to.
All right.
No, God told them.
All right.
They're supposed to be beating.
Now, also, there's another thing that's a problem with this, also found in verse 4 of Joshua. Of course, the priests are never to be numbered. How do we know that? Turn back to Numbers chapter 1.
I figured that out first.
You did.
This time.
Turn to Numbers chapter 1. Now, here's another very enigma, and I'm going to tell you it's very enigmatic. Numbers chapter 1, and we're going to look at verses 47 through 49. "The Levites, however, were not numbered among them by their father's tribe. For the Lord had spoken to Moses, saying, Only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, nor shall you take their census among the sons of Israel." So, what do you find in this thing? Do you think 7 of them numbered? Right, 7 of them numbered. Now, the interesting thing about this, and if you look at Numbers chapters 1, 2, and 3, it's about numbering the people, but it's specifically numbering the males that are of 20 years or older, the fighting men, okay? And it goes by tribe, and this tribe, and that tribe, and this family group, and finally adds them all up. And then, interestingly enough, after doing this, and of course we just said they're not supposed to be numbered, Then you turn to chapter 3, and you find that then God numbers the Levites.
Or chapter 3 of Numbers.
Yeah. And you go, now hold it. I thought they weren't supposed to be numbered. But the interesting thing is, when you read the numbers of the different elements of the three different families, and I'm not going to get into this in depth, but it's a very interesting study. You find that when you add them all up, they don't add up correctly. You can't get the numbers to jive. Now, some people suggested maybe there was a textual error here, okay, somehow.
And it's pretty obvious. I mean, it's easy.
It is.
Even for the person like me to notice that.
It's way off.
Something is, way off.
It's way off. Now, I'm telling you, here's my opinion. You can consider it, think about it, and pray about it. All right? My viewpoint. I think that the reason why they're numbered but they can't be accurately numbered is because they are a unique group that represent the mystical nature of God. And I think you can defend that 1,000 different ways if you read all the things that God says about what the Levites can and can't do. Therefore, they're unquantifiable. Just like God's mystical nature is not quantifiable. And I think that's why they're numbered, but they're not numbered. I think it's a very interesting, again, you can consider it. As a matter of fact, in Numbers 3:12, I'll read it to you, God makes a statement about the Levites. He says, "Now behold, I have taken the Levites from among the sons of Israel instead of every firstborn." He says, "So the Levites shall be mine." In other words, God could have designated the firstborn of every person in the family as the tithe, if you want to call it that way, his. But he didn't do it that way. The other tribes, he exempted them from that and decided to take a unique tribe called the Levites instead. They are his first fruits. They are his first fruits. And I think that's, again, a very unique nature of them.
You say they're a unique group which represents the mysterious?
I think they represent the mysterious aspect of God.
Mysterious aspect.
That he's more than whatever you can quantify.
Right.
Okay? I am that I am. There's no end. I'm perpetual.
Right, I am to you.
Absolutely. All right, now, think about the typology of this weird battle. Okay? The strange nature, the numbers in it, the trumpets. You can't shout, then you do shout. I want you to turn to Revelation chapter 8.
People at Jericho must have been looking down and thinking, what kind of battle is this?
I think they must have thought, at least for the first 6 days, that maybe they needed to create a large mental institution. Okay? To send the Jews. Now, again.
I think after they've seen the Jordan River split off, they probably were not surprised.
Maybe.
It was like,
Maybe.
okay, what's that?
Again, I've reiterated to you time and time again, the book of Joshua is typological. What it teaches is true history, but it teaches a type, and those types continue and unfold in the future. Okay? So, Revelation chapter 8, let's read verses 1, 2, I believe it's 1, 2, and 6. I don't know. Yeah. And when he broke the seventh seal, there was a silence in heaven for about a half an hour. That's interesting. 7, silence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Think of the battle.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and their 7 trumpets were given to them. Drop down to verse 6. And the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound them. Sound familiar? Mm-hmm. I don't think it's coincidental. I think it's the typology that God weaves through history. And of course, this is the end of the typology in the book of Revelation. It's all embedded information all the way through it. Now, I want to close this out with what I consider to be the oddest verse of all of these in Joshua. This one has troubled me. So back to Joshua 6. And this is tough to understand in the English. Let's read it again. But remember the positioning, the prepositions here as you read it. Let's read it slowly, okay? And it was so that when Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of the ram's horns before the Lord went forward and blew the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed. Now, so the priests with the trumpets walk ahead of the ark. Now the ark, of course, is the traditional site or indicates the traditional presence of God, right? Nothing epitomizes the presence of God more than the Ark of the Covenant. So the priests with trumpets walk ahead of the ark, which is this traditional site of the presence of the Lord. But then it says that they passed on before the Lord. Now what's that about? The word there, pass on, the word before the Lord, is the word in Hebrew, abar. And it means to pass by, pass through, pass beyond, or overtake. Okay? Before the Lord is the word paniyim, P-A-N-I-Y-M, and it means for something to be in front of, or in the presence of, or in the face of. So the question in this verse is, how could the priest walk ahead of the ark, then the Lord passes by or follows them?
Yeah, how?
I don't get quite
Let me repeat it again.
I mean, I hear what
be
you're saying.
ahead, and now it's
Right.
kind of behind.
Right.
And it says the Lord passes by them. So how could the Lord, since the Lord is supposed to be represented in his presence in the ark, pass by them all? Because the ark's out there with them. How could that be?
It looks to me like it's saying the priest went before the Lord.
Now,
So
let
the
me-
Lord went before.
Let me tell you one thing. At the very end of verse 8, it says, and I looked at the construction of this in the Hebrew. It says, and the ark of the covenant, and then where it says of the Lord, you could easily translate that or equally translate that, the ark of the covenant, comma, and the Lord followed them. In other words, you could easily translate it as the ark of the covenant and the Lord are separate. And I suggest to you that might be the better translation in the grammar. Okay? I'm not a Hebrew scholar,
But
but
either way, it was behind.
absolutely. Now, here's why I think it makes sense. Here's why I think this is spoken of this way. Turn to Exodus 23. We're going to look at 2 verses to remind you of 2 things that God says. Exodus 23, starting verse 20. He says, behold, I'm going to send an angel before you to guard you along the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Be on your guard before him and obey his voice. Do not be rebellious towards him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, since my name is in him. But if you will truly obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites. Who are we battling here? Jericho, the Amorites, and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them. So he promises this unique personage to be right there with them, right?
Right.
All right, now turn back a few books over to Deuteronomy 23. Towards the very end of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 23 and verse 14. He says, since the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and to defeat your enemies before you. Therefore your camp must be holy. What did they just do? They circumcised, they consecrated, took Passover. Since your camp must be holy, and he must not see anything indecent among you, lest he turn away from you. So he's saying, the Lord's saying there's a special presence that he's going to give them during their conquest. All right? So I think, and again, my opinion, I think there are two entities here. The entity of God's presence in the ark, and then this other entity, who I believe is the captain of the Lord's host. I think he's right in the procession with them.
Okay. So, 7 priests with trumpets first.
Mm-hmm.
Then the ark, priests carrying the ark. Then behind them, people.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So the only guys who are ahead of the ark are actually the 7 guys with trumpets?
Yes, in a sense, but I'm going to suggest to you that it's a never-ending loop.
I was going to say, but yeah, what about the tail?
Exactly. I think the point is it's a never-ending loop. You couldn't possibly go around a city this small with that many folks and it, in the beginning not also be the end.
Okay.
Okay?
What does that mean?
Well, again, it's another example of, I think it's typological of the fact that God is the beginning from the end from the beginning. He begins, he sees it through, he causes the end. Just like the captain or general of the Lord's host shows up the night before.
All right. In that loop, in that the whole thing, okay, where God is in the ark.
I think he's in two places. I think
Okay.
he's showing up in two entities.
Okay.
He's showing up as the captain of the Lord's host, and he's showing up in his presence in the Ark of the Covenant.
So his presence is still there in the Ark of the Covenant, and where is the general? He's
walking before them,
before blows the trumpet.
before the procession. I think what it's telling us is he's right there in the middle of it, looping around with them.
But how do we know that? What makes you think that there is a literally the general of God's army walking before them?
Because, like I said in the verse, it says the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets,
Mm-hmm.
okay, of ram's horns before the Lord. It means literally in the face of, doesn't mean so much in front of,
Right.
it means in the presence of, okay,
Ah.
in the face of God.
Oh.
That's what it means.
Like, Lord, here I am.
It's a very interesting sentence grammatically. And like I said, the thing that makes most sense to me, honestly, is in the very end of it, where it says the Ark of the Covenant, instead of the Lord, I think it's very likely that it could, I know that it is easily be translated, the Ark of the Covenant, comma, the Lord, followed them.
Mm-hmm.
2. Ark of the Covenant, the Lord.
Okay, that's cool.
Now, the grammar's interesting in that. You know,
Well,
Let's put it this way. Let me tell you the one thing I do know. I'm giving you my best estimate of what it means. But the one thing I can tell you is the obvious. It is an enigmatic verse. It is intentionally odd. Therefore, there's something going on. It's being said for a reason that way.
like, sleep with this now.
Consider.
Think
Think about
about
it.
Okay.
So, I only got through 8 verses, but I'm telling you, I felt there was so much information in the first 8. That's all we could.
That was that interesting.
Yes.
Mikey, would you close us with prayer? Sure will.
Tonight?
Lord, thank you so much for your word and especially to understand how powerful you are through this whole book of Joshua in that you have orchestrated every step of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And much more that we really don't even understand, Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So it's exciting to know that you are within us. And so if you were able, Lord, to guide this massive group of people and to destroy the enemy, we have more and more reason to follow your direction and our footsteps, Lord. So again, we're in your debt for all that you have given us in these just few sentences of your word, Lord. It's remarkable how much you have placed in each and every word. So much so that us with our finite minds won't understand it until we're in your presence, Lord. So we want to thank you again and again for allowing us here on earth to have an inkling of how majestic, how wonderful, how powerful you really are, Lord. In your precious name, we give you thanks for you each and every day. Amen.
Amen.